Okay, I'm back again. I am reading the very, very last chapter of this book, The Princess Royale, and it is by Helen Cathcart. And I am going to show you what it is about. It is about the birth. It's 1977, and it is about the birth of the Queen's first grandchildren, which is Zara. This is Peter Phillips. This is the current picture of Peter and Zara Phillips, and they have no titles. And it's very fascinating because Anne wanted them to grow up to have a normal life and not be encumbered with, titles. So I wanted to show you a young picture. This right here. That's Diana with the kids. But this is them. They're young, the young children of Peter. This is Peter, and this is Zara. Well, Zara looks so much like our mother, you can tell. And then there she is. There she is with the little, kilts on. But that is the grandchildren. So I'm going to start reading. It's 20 pages, and it's one of the best chapters. It's the last chapter, so I wanted you guys to see pictures of the children. Master Peter Phillips, the Queen's first grandchild, was born 15 November 1977 in what might be termed the Royal Suite at the Linda Wing at the back of St. Mary's Hospital in Paddington. This is in northwest London. His timing was impeccable, for his parents celebrated their 4th anniversary at Buckingham Palace the previous day. The Queen's gynecologist, Mr. George Pinker, was summoned shortly after 4 a.m. when a 27-year-old princess had begun labor. The baby was born at 10:46 a.m. He weighed in at 7 pounds 9 ounces. His father was present at the birth, having been called from an adjoining room after the ambulance rush through Hyde Park to the hospital. And within minutes he was on the special telephone link that had been installed to the Queen at Buckingham Palace to announce jubilantly that it's a boy. Her Majesty was about to hold an investiture, and it was one of those rare occasions which she delayed for only 10 minutes until she had telephoned Prince Philip, who was in Germany. On her entrance, she forgot an instant to bid her guests to be seated. She said, "I apologize for being late, but I have just a message from the hospital. My daughter has given birth to a son." A delighted cheer went up, and the band in the balcony at once played "Happy Birthday," to be greeted with an instant applause. It was the Queen's Silver Jubilee year, the Commonwealth celebrating the 25 years since her accession, and within a week she would also be celebrating her 30th wedding anniversary. Nothing happier than this gift of the first grandchild, and one noticed the Queen Mother, too, was quick to announce from Clarence House her own great pleasure of hearing the news of her first great-grandson. At the baby's grandfather's Wiltshire village at Great Somerford, the church bells pealed in celebration, although his 3 Windsor uncles, Prince Charles, Andrew, and Edward, were in the line of succession. Master Peter, for the time being, was being followed by his mother as 5th in line to the throne. And the College of Arms dug up the choice tidbit that he was the first royal grandchild in 500 years to be born as a commoner. The Queen once asked Captain Phillips whether he would accept an offer of an earldom, and at that moment it may be true that he thanked her and replied, he told the Queen, to hold your commission in honor. To hold your commission is honor enough, ma'am. The subject was raised again when the Queen was advised that the baby could have a title in his own right, but the princess championed her husband's wish for the children to remain ordinary. Mark too often seen the embarrassment and dismay of young officers whose fathers had died and precipitated them into the change of a name and deceptive luster of peerage. In Mark's view, winning a title one of these days was more challenging. Despite the pleasure she was to gain from becoming Princess Royale, the Queen's daughter too already cherished firm, non-royal ideals of desirable childhood. They had been given the chance to grow up in a reasonable normality, not to be landed with labels now, because everything will be discussed and remembered endlessly when they are older. They ought to be judged for themselves when they get the chance. The Queen made no demur on the babies' names. Peter was named for his father, Mark Anthony Peter, and his grandfather's Peter William. Philip Phillips would never have done, and Prince Andrew, tremendously pleased to find himself a 17-year-old uncle and godfather. The christening held in the deep blue column splendor of the palace music room where Anne herself had been baptized. The surroundings made a right royal picture. The Victorian lily font, the same Huntington lace robe with all Queen Victoria's direct descendants, and the baby Anne had worn, the Chapel Royal Choir, the red-robed, white-ruffed, the godparents were kin or close friends from both sides, the Prince of Wales and Prince Andrew, writer Jane Bullen, Lady Cecil Cameron, Captain Hamish Fletcher, army and hunting friend, Mrs. Timothy Holderness, from among old family friends, and adding a touch of historical interest on the distaff side, a cousin, the Reverend Geoffrey Tyarks, a retired bishop of Maidstone. He descended from the Reverend Johann Tyarks, chaplain to none other than the Duchess of Kent, the mother of Queen Victoria, Princess Anne's great-great-great-grandmother. In less than 3 years, Anne found herself expecting another baby, and made the best of it, although perhaps echoing Queen Victoria's sentiments that 6 months of pregnancy was very boring, an occupational hazard if you're a wife. Once again, the scene was the Lindo ward, the same room where, as a nice coincidence, the print of a horse in a meadow still decorated the wall. The baby girl arrived most punctually at 8:15, and on the 15th of May, 1981, precisely 3 months before Anne's 30th birthday. Other than Mark Phillips and the Queen, the first visitor was Prince Andrew. He was carrying a big bouquet of carnations, and evidently he charmed his sister. And she asked him then and there if he would like to be a godfather again. The other sponsors, it turned out, were to be Helen Stuart, wife of the ace motoring driver, Jackie Stuart; Lenora, Countess of Lichfield, sister of the wealthy Duke of Westminster, a Gloucester neighbor and teammate in the Montreal British riding team; Hugh Thomas and Andrew Parker Bowles of the Household Cavalry, national hunt jockey and racing owner, whose family had been friends of the royals for 4 generations. And then, forming a prelude to other happy events, the christening was held in the cream-painted private chapel at Windsor Castle, only 2 days before Charles and Diana's wedding. Another bridesmaid, said Charles. We could carry her down the aisle on a cushion. The first of the baby's three names, Zara and Elizabeth, puzzled the Queen only briefly. She would soon inform that Charles had chosen it. Well, that's interesting. Charles chose Zara's name. It's a fresh and it's unusual and it's contemporary, although actually it's a Hebrew name, and it means bright as the dawn. Zara and Elizabeth had been in fact suggested by Prince Charles after he heard it as an attractive name for a little girl from the Legge Bourke family, a niece of Anne's ex-Benedin lady-in-waiting. Unfamiliar as it was to raise eyebrows in thousands of British homes. Yet it is listed in a history of names by the Barbara Cartland of the 19th century. Charlotte M. Young, from the Arabic, a form of Sarah, the Hebrew word for princess. Well, that's interesting. Zara is the Hebrew word for princess. Today, the name is acceptable and familiar in everyday use at Beaudesert Park, the pre-prep school within walking distance of Gatcombe. This is where Zara, then age 5, advanced from kindergarten to lessons as a day girl. At age 10, Peter, too, was going to prep school at Port Regis, the expensive but neighboring co-educational establishment. Peter is the image of his father, but for his streak of indifference towards horse riding, nothing would give me greater pleasure, says Mark, if he was really wanted to ride horses. But I'm not going to make him do it. He has a mind and character of his own. Zara was astride a pony at 2, riding adeptly at 5. Sprinkling of her mother's obduracy too, like all mothers, the princess must sometimes sigh and ask herself how many years have flown since the tedium of waiting for the Peter. An oddity 6 months before Zara's arrival had been an invitation for a 5-day visit to Maryland to unveil a statue of Queen Anne, a curious duty at such a time, considering the tragic circumstances of that other Anne and her dead babies. In happier contrast, while waiting for Peter back in 1977, Anne remembers day visits to Gatcombe, placidly deciding with her husband where all the wedding gifts, their Oak Lodge treasures, and where they should go, while Mark obligingly pushed and tugged at the furniture. And only 2 days later, after leaving the hospital in which her parents were able to enjoy the baby, Mark had driven her home to Gatcombe with little Peter cradled in her arms. Okay, we're on to part 2. It was a typical family schedule that when the Queen came down from her finished and furnished view of the house, her chauffeur carried her red dispatch box as usual. But she got through her morning paperwork on the 80-mile run from Windsor. In Rab Butler's day, a local artist had made a drawing of the house, a picture which Anne and Mark admired so much that they bought the copyright and used it for their first Christmas card, giving the Queen the first copy. Early in the new year, Mark went off like a young student to take a course in modern farming and management at the Royal Agricultural College, 10 miles away at Cirencester. One of the Royal Ag's pieces of advice was that farming capital might be found if an insurance company or business institution first bought the farm and then leased it back. Prosperity also rested on the maxim, the larger the farm, the more the profit. Mark's first thought was of renting a few score acres from a neighboring farm. only to find that his neighbor would be more interested in selling his entire estate farm, which was 533 acres. To acquire it would be an increase to Gatcombe to 1,260 acres of meadow and woodland, but in fact no business institution could be found so readily prepared to buy and lease it back. One evening, Princess Anne happened to mention this difference between precept and practice to her mother. "But why not let me be the institution?" said the Queen. And the difficulty was solved. Captain Phillips, he thus rented the adjoining Aston farm from his mother-in-law. The two farmsteads worked as one unit, with one meadow reserved as a helicopter pad for the Queen's flight. It was a vital facility of the Princess Royale's public life. An appropriate slice of civil-list income was also apportioned to Gatcombe toward the maintenance of the princess's official residence. At the outset, the designer, David Hicks, was briefed above all to maintain a simple, countrified atmosphere. His recommendations indeed achieved a new sense of space, light and comfort, a new library and study, and an efficient kitchen and service wing. Upstairs, an array of old-fashioned and overlarge bedrooms yielded 8 sunny bedroom suites with modern bathrooms. Within months, an attic of innumerable box-like rooms became a sunny and spacious nursery suite with a sitting room, bathrooms, kitchenette, laundry, and ample storage space. Ultimately, it turned out that the children were always to have the run of the house. Downstairs, the glass-fronted conservatory wing became a highway for children's bikes, all-weather playroom, and a party room. If the Princess Royale once admitted to stealing ideas from her grandmother's home at Royal Lodge, the clue could be seen in the stone-flagged entrance hall. With its wellies and scattered toys and a scruffy, space-stealing rocking horse, becoming increasingly scuffed these past 7 years. Below the sweeping staircase, the hooded Orkney watchman's chair and its attendant New Zealand stools are brightened by flower arrangements. A large, long case clock, a wedding gift from the citizens of Westminster, added a note of dignity. To the right is a dining room, its monogrammed suite of dining chairs made not far away by Cotswold craftsmen. Dinner guests in this room found that table talk veered widely from horse trials and saddle groups, car racing and travel, to hunt saboteurs, occasionally staff problems, and country topics of every kind. To the left of the hall is the drawing room, pleasantly proportioned with sofas hospitably flanking the fireplace. Any formality here is provided by wedding gifts, the Army's elegant walnut tall boy, the brass-topped occasional tables from the Dutch royal family, the late Shah of Persia's carpet. The princess's study contains Prince Philip's useful gift of a Chippendale desk. This is utilized mainly for the innumerable speeches the princess drafts at home, not to mention her extensive personal correspondence. Her secretariat trio at the palace telephone her at Gatcombe only when absolutely essential. "I haven't many friends," she once said, meaning perhaps no more than 20 close ones. These would include the women friends who also form a rota group of ladies-in-waiting. Among them is Leonora, the Countess of Lichfield, Rowena Brassey, now Mrs. Fielden, and Cecilia Innes, whom Anne recruited on the understanding that it was only for the time she could spare from her two children. This was in the late 70s, when Cecilia and Princess Anne constantly shared maternal viewpoints and old nursery maxims. Crying is a baby's only form of conversation. Contented children rarely cry. Babies are people, all with different characters. Then there is Miss Carol Poe, formerly Mary Donny, who became the first of all Anne's ladies back in 1970 when the princess hardly turned 20. They had just agreed to become president of the Save the Children Fund. Indeed, Mary Donny may have been directly responsible for the involvement. Whenever possible, she continued to accompany the Princess Royale on all major SCF events. It was possible also that Mary had left a book lying about which is now known to have ultimately inspired Anne with a new sense of purpose and mission. Alternatively, there was a copy in the Library of Britannia during the Cows Week in 1970 when Anne and Mary were both aboard, and the title immediately sprang to the eye. Rebel Daughter of a Country Home. Was not Anne an identified rebel in nearly every aspect of her royal life, writing excepted? Was not her home a country mansion, akin to Sandringham, a royal lodge, its family known for its royal conscience and certain originality as mentioned in the preface? The book was a biography of Eglantine Jebb, the woman who founded the Save the Children Fund in 1919. She was born to a generation which followed that of Florence Nightingale, Lady with the Lamp, who shattered the idea that indifference could be tolerated in the presence of misery. Indifference could be tolerated in the presence of misery, Princess Anne wrote in a well-worded SCF presidential message. But charity has had to become intelligent. In her late teens, Anne had accepted the view that charitable causes form a rightful, though conventional interest of the monarchy, but they represent only a penny in the plate for ordinary people. Now she read of a woman of gentle upbringing who discovered an inner sense of purpose and a self-imposed mission to rescue children from disease, starvation, and neglect. At the First World War, children were dying of famine in the streets of Vienna, and Eglantine Jebb had first printed a one-sheet leaflet to draw friends together into a campaign to fight the famine. Within days, the president of the Miners' Trade Union, Bob Smiley, presented her with £10,000, and this rapidly grew into £35,000. Within 6 months, her Save the Children Fund was a fighting reality, and an established day of collections for which cause was appointed to Anglicans, Catholics, free churches throughout the world. Princess Anne told her first council meeting that she meant to be an active, acting president. Princess Anne stated, "I knew nothing about voluntary work when I started," she said, "beyond having sponsored a child through the fund at school, visiting elderly through the Girls' Guides, and at a Dr. Bernardo's washing up sink." Now she invariably types out her annual presidential message in single-spaced in small pica type on a double-column foolscap palace notepaper. As Princess Royale in 1987, she addressed the annual general meeting of members packing the Barbican Hall as a working president, which was indisputable. She arrived at 10 a.m., to recognize familiar faces from Liverpool, Glasgow, Northern Ireland. Branch managers were from Nepal and Bangladesh, delegates from Denmark, Norway, and Netherlands, New South Wales, and the USA. She sat inconspicuously in the audience until invited to the stage to accept a £50,000 check for the fund from Mobil Oil, £15,000 from Westminster Bank from the sales of a pop record, and similarly generous sums from motorcycle racing, a tea importing concern, a trailer firm, and others. 35 minutes were allowed for her for a sandwich lunch. Alone on the stage, she talked of her hot news and a promised gift of many thousands from a press millionaire, of context of her successful fourth visit to Northern Ireland, getting acquainted with factories and play centers, befriending prisoners' children, stone-throwing youngsters got individually referred from courts and prisons to friends and community schemes to help align a more positive direction in their lives rather than custody. She talked of the 43 million income in 1986 that was reduced to 35 million pounds in 1987. She said, "We must all get back to last year's welcome reassurance and then do better than that." Offstage, she put in time talking to reporters of her opening up a new shop in Bath, latest of a chain of 100 SCF shops acting as a giant collection tin on the high streets. While raising over £1 million a year, the shop properties are also increasing in value. The princess's overseas tours were readily attracting new publicity. But one underplayed aspect is that before third world visits, she had to be inoculated against cholera, typhoid, meningitis, yellow fever, tetanus, rabies, and hepatitis, hence a preference for long sleeves. After visiting Somalia one year, her plane landed in a war-ravaged Beirut. To give her extra intensive day with the Save the Children Fund clinic, meeting the health workers and emphasizing, in French, to young mothers that breastfeeding is best when water is polluted. Her mere presence may bring side effects. When visiting Hong Kong, she stressed the need for funds to give medical care and vocational training to children from refugee families. But it mysteriously became known that whilst there she might visit an isolated village, which had vainly tried years before to obtain a main water supply, the pipeline was laid the week before Anne's arrival. In Britain itself, whenever city authorities inquire whether a gift presentation to Her Royal Highness could feature in a forthcoming visit, she gently suggested that a donation to the SCF or some other cause would be preferred, and some aspect of the fund is unexpectedly woven into her secondary engagements for the evening. When Michael Parkinson invited her to be interviewed on his television show at the beginning of a tour of Australia, she agreed provided he pay the SCF £6,000. On another occasion, 5,000 phone calls jammed the BBC switchboard when only 25 callers could be selected to question her during her live phone-in Tuesday call radio program in 1985. Though the agreed fee to her chosen charity remains unknown in this instance, and she was happy to write for publication without fee after her Save the Children journey to Nepal. An observer noted the more arduous part of her tour. Oh, this is very interesting. This is where Anne shows her mettle. A steep 4-hour climb in the Himalaya to see the newly founded mother and child clinic. The princess showed her how superbly fit she was, leaving several of her party gasping for breath in the rare atmosphere. And Anne herself states, "Put simply, our field teams are responsible for turning paper dreams into reality. We met a quiet hill man halfway up a mountain track as she was returning home from a long trek. It was his duty to deliver our sponsors' grants to individual children in the region. In the process, he regularly covered vast distances. He enjoyed his work, but was constantly worried because the children's reply letters were not always ready for collection. Have you had any advice to offer?" I inquired. "Yes," he said, with a hint of a smile. "Please tell your generous people to be patient." From her own early experience at Benetton and sponsoring SCF children, the Princess Royale knows more than most about the SCF global involvement. A fellow director had testified. The assistance of the Queen's flight planes, the spares carrying Andovers, and short hop helicopters, in an unprecedented modern touch facilitating Anne's swift and personal inspection of projects that are succeeding or those that are going wrong to see what can be put right. One year, she personally launched a Stop Polio campaign to send immunization teams into Central and Southern Africa, and subsequently, she covered 14,000 miles in 3 weeks in monitoring results, watchful that the £500,000 budget would be wisely spent on the training schemes and the relief aid to refugees. You can at least produce a way of approaching a problem that will make it easier. When you're there, actually seeing children who are severely malnourished, possibly on the point of dying, it's never a sight that anybody wants to see, but you are involved in the business of actually trying to help. In lighter vein, Anne writes, "I'm constantly amazed by the ingenuity of fundraising events, which range from sponsored street crawls to haute couture fashion shows." Nor does she mind confessing that even her Stop Polio journey had its own compensations, including flying up to the Victorian Falls and watching hippos splashing beside the Zambezi. One reflects that Prince Philip, Prince Andrew, and Prince Edward have all published books, and it is undoubtedly true that an edited volume of Prince Anne's travel letters and jottings to friends could yield Save the Children handsome royalties. Okay. Part 3. Whenever a new mission overseas was announced for the Princess Royal, it could be frequently said to coincide with her husband's equestrian clinics in the United States and Canada, or his sophisticated Range Rover publicity drives in Australia and New Zealand. When the Queen was at Balmoral in the summer, Anne was often there assisting her mother with guests. Her husband at the Mark Phillips Equestrian Centre at Gleneagles, training promising young Scottish riders in sporting lessons, or supervising riding instruction for the enthusiasts from the hotel. Soon after, the Queen and the Princess saw, in the 1988 New Year at Sandringham, Captain Mark Phillips had begun his stint, sharing his knowledge of horses and horse riding at Gleneagles. As the hotel advertisements proclaimed, the cost was $295 per person including all lectures and demonstrations, as well as a cocktail party, a special farewell dinner, and 3 nights of full board, and an ambitious new attraction for as far ahead as February 1989 was beginning to take shape with the Guinness £3 million tourist investment. With its 3 arenas, stabling and cross-country jumps, restaurants and shops, and 5,000 acres of moorland rides, all enhanced by the magnet of Mark's reputation. 3 days of show jumping with speed classes, Grand Prix, and £75,000 in prize money, as outlined in the publicity material. Separated at times to different continents, often spending days apart in different countries, Anne's and Mark's lifestyle in their 15th year of marriage, transformed by their natural involvement in these booming new industries. Basically, Mark said, I'm a farmer, he told magistrates in the autumn of 1987 when he was so nearly disqualified from driving after a speeding summons. Basically, Anne could have echoed, she was a farmer's wife. Under oath, Mark gave evidence that he drove 40,000 miles a year in the course of his farming, equestrian, and business activities, and that in the 5 days before the offense he had clocked 1,500 miles. Much of this mileage was in fact amassed in the good cause of getting home to the tranquility of Gate Home and his wife. It was interesting, too, that his testimony presented the world with an authentic peep into his working preoccupation. The 4 new horses he had to find as soon as possible for his sponsored competition team, the likely horse he had to inspect out of his way at Taunton, the looming 3-day event at Chatsworth, the one afternoon off when he could be taking his wife to see their son at school, and then impending a 2-month trip to Japan, Korea, and Australia. The farm was economically run with a manager and 3 full-timers, and with any necessary extra day labor recruited from the village or found through the Royal Agricultural College notice board. Prince Edward, and before him Prince Andrew, would come down to help with the harvest, and Princess Anne drove the tractor. In early years, Mark would return home after a long day. He was so tired that I fell asleep in front of the television, and would comment in apology, we have to earn the money for the things we enjoy. Farming was indeed a basic essential, yet so was his writing career. It happened that badminton's owner, David Somerset, the 11th Duke of Beaufort, and Mark quite enjoyed the compatibility of the same age group. Coming over to lunch, David and his wife Caroline readily familiarized Anne and Mark with the detailed background of their horse trials, the planning and novelties of the course, the fence building, the catering, and the contribution of Whitebreads, the brewers, in providing prize money and handsome trophies. You too could do it, a friend urged, until in 1983, Anne and Mark agreed on the adventure of a 1-day event at Gatcombe, and it was an experiment. The first step was taken when Captain Mark Phillip applied to the country planners for permission to build a stable block for 16 horses within the old walls of his kitchen garden. The application clearly placed the importance of equine life. It was on a higher level that might appear from Princess Anne's second thoughts. One enjoys riding, but when you get back, there's still a half a day's work to do just to keep the darn thing on 4 legs. You have time for nothing else. The princess seldom complained of horses eating their heads off, though her husband conceded that Horses are the biggest hole in the system. The matter was even discussed in Parliament when Land Rover of the British Leyland Group announced that they would sponsor the maintenance of Captain Mark's horses at £20,000 a year for 3 years. Moreover, they undertook to set up a bursary for 18 riders a year to receive the captain's expert tuition. This takes the unaccustomed reader into the complex riddle of the amateur status of riders. But in the technical sense, Mark remained a non-professional, eligible to enter for European and World Championships. The agent responsible for setting up the contracts was Mark McCormick, who had also represented such personalities as Jackie Stewart and Angela Rippon. Also magically ensured that the Rover organization would pay for the transport, even the horse boxes, the harnesses, the water, and a year's back pay. After this, no one was surprised that, freed from the dire costs of upkeep, Mark's finances had improved. Another backer, the sherry firm Crofts, put up £10,000 towards the 2.5-mile event course, crisscrossing through the Gatcombe Park and woods with 26 Mark-designed obstacles. One would spectacularly take competitors through an old stone barn and a duck pond. Another presented 3 tiers of Cotswold stone, and the princess dreamed up a washing line replete with enormous bloomers and bras. Interesting rather than tough, as Mark said. A joinery firm presented new fences in return for a suitable program mention. The public far and wide also learned that Captain Phillips turned to Simpson's, the men's store, and for his dacks and informal sportswear. And somewhat surprising deal was the brushwood cleared from the course was not consumed by bonfires, but burnt into paintbrush handles for the Harris Company. The McCormick Agency left no stones unturned. Across the Atlantic, packaged holidays sprouted under the title A Sporting Week with English Gentry, meaning that American guests would be met at Heathrow by chauffeur-driven Range Rovers, and during the vacation, Mark would give lessons at a shooting school. The celebrated newscaster and author Angela Rippon wrote a book about Mark and was equally busy taking Range Rover guests on guided tours at Gatcombe Park and the Forest Jumping Route. To Anne's anger and Angela's distress, this news was distorted into a wild romance by the news media. Mark also spent anguished hours making a video set of 6 lessons on horsemanship. But the one-day event, incorporating dressage and show jumping and cross-country, was the jewel in the crown, attracting 40,000 through the turnstiles. The sponsors were amply satisfied, save for a private gross to Mark. If only your wife could have come on the speakers with the prelude on dressage, the way she talks to friends. Dressage is a word for education. If you can walk, trot, and canter when you want, turn left, and then when you want, and right when you want, you shouldn't be on a horse. But the princess protested, "It's Mark's show. I may compete if I find a horse I like, and if it likes me." In subsequent years, the one day developed into 2 days, with a good proportion of TV rights going to the British Horse Society, then supplementary meeting they were staged. One year, a grand assemblage of 100 trailers for a caravan club occasion and a galas for the riding of the Disabled Association with the fun of a celebrity Shetland pony race and side saddle events. In 1987, the Croft originally opened championship fell on the Princess Royale's birthday. I would have preferred it had not, she shrugged. But it was amazing how swiftly the private contact lawn groomers cleaned everything up and how smartly grass recovered from the pressure of 45,000 pairs of feet. Okay, this is just the last part. We've got a couple more pages to read, and then we are done with the book. This is part 4. So I'm going to take a slight drink here. Okay. Though one may wish to compare the personality traits of our Princess Royale of today with the characteristics of that of other hard-riding Princess Royale of 260 years ago, George II's eldest daughter, the Princess Royal Anne, it would be a fruitless exercise. With hot Hanoverian blood, the Georgian Anne rode to hounds so violently that she alarmed her sister. P.S. We are just back from hunting, in good health. We can discern in the fading ink. Our Anne has been a member of the Beaufort Hunt for many years, sympathizing with critics, but enthusing with the mingled terror and delight of her steed soaring over the winter hedges. At 20, she was acclaimed the finest rider in the Western world, winning the European Cup against all comers. Her first race was the preeminent Derby course at Epsom at the start of the spring season, terribly keen to win, as Mr. Kershaw, the clerk at the course, noted. Her opponents in the 16-horse field were all atop amateur caliber, and the prize was destined for one of the princess's favorite causes, which was riding for the disabled. But after getting to the 4th place in the halfway stage, she fell back to 7th. The winner was nevertheless the first woman ever to win the Derby course, and the charity took £32,000 on that day. It's most unlikely I'll ever be seen racing colors again, said Anne, downcast. But she did try again, equally lucklessly from year to year, in both steeplechasing and on the flat. Her first attempt at steeplechasing at Kempton Park, riding her own horse, Nakul, was watched by her 2 children, who saw her come in 4th and last. You have to win a race, a disgruntled supporter shouted from the crowd. Perhaps that pleasure was being reserved until she became Princess Royal. A month after receiving that distinction, indeed, on Diamond Day at Ascot, the Queen's voice was unmistakably heard from the royal box. Don't be so cool. Do something, Anne's horse. 10, No Trumps, may have remembered that he was the son of Mummy's pet, and he put on an astonishing spurt and won by 3 lengths. 2 months later, and then in her first outing over the sticks since receiving her enhanced title, the Princess Royal again rode Nakul, once more watched by her children, who practically turned cartwheels of joy at her win. The exhilaration of working while Mark was away was also being noticed as a feature of the Princess Royal's life in her 1987 first season. On a typical day, she toured a big factory group in Staffordshire. She opened and toured a new mining museum in Stoke. She lunched in another factory office. She opened a new invalid housing development in Birmingham and was still at work after tea. She opened a blind people's center in Walsall. Or again, one might find her watching a riding for the disabled demonstration in Somerset, and in the morning at another demonstration in Devon in the afternoon, and in the evening she gave a lecture in Salisbury Cathedral. The Princess Royal's duties have included anything from attending a ceremony to naming a ship for the Pitcairn Tahiti run, a BBC visit to take part as a player in a quiz show, and a share in the sponsorship race horse ride from Buckingham Palace to Aintree to aid a cancer-fighting trust. That's in addition to the wet and bumpy lifeboat ride with her son, Peter, to pick up a 50,000-pound check for the Lifeboat Institution. Appropriately, too, on the day after her 14th wedding anniversary, the Princess Royale set out on a Save the Children journey for her special year, including visits to Singapore, Thailand, Laos, Rangoon, and Burma. No joyride from any perspective, with that first awful view of the tragically crowded refugee camp of Ban Napo, where SEF medical staff performed the literally life-saving task of spoon-feeding those children at risk. The visit the next day into Laos was to judge projects on which the SEF had spent an initial £100,000, then to Rangoon and the dreadful cemetery of 6,000 bronze plaques where Gardner told the princess of the widows from Britain, "They come all the time and come again and stand back and they look. The Princess Royale, too, will come again. Throughout the world, she will be coming again, wherever they can speed the work of saving children." On the onset of 1988, she opened up in Westminster a World Summit conference on the programs for AIDS prevention. And why not? She is the Princess Royale of our time. In February, too, as president, she headed the British team to Calgary for the Winter Olympics game. On the very eve of takeoff, she was also voted onto the International Olympics Committee, with a curious result that 21 minutes after touchdown, she sped across the city as an international delegate to welcome other British Olympic members. From Canadian snow, she simply changed suitcases in London and flew to the heat of Uganda on a shrewd Save the Children fact-seeking drive in the war-ruined areas. And the Queen's daughter is at all events a Princess Royale for the 21st century. And that is the end. This is Princess Anne. She was remarkable, is remarkable. She has a stamina that is like no other. I'm just going to read this last little section from the acknowledgments, and then this is the end of the chapter. The qualities and achievements of our Princess Anne have been hallmark, so to speak, in naming her as the 7th Princess Royale in Britain's Long Island history. But 3 of these, in fact, belong to her 20th century. And the style and distinction are more nearly a royal innovation of our time that is supposed. So, anyways, that is Princess Anne, our current Princess Royale. And that is the end of the book. It's a wonderful book. You can find it at Amazon. I suggest you read it. It's a great summer read, and it can be found on Audible. So